But I think what will happen is that in the extremity where you could get a no confidence motion put down, what will in fact happen is the House of Commons will vote to block no deal and for a referendum. And it will do what happened in March, which was Dominic Grieve, Oliver Letwin, Yvette Cooper and co coming together and taking charge of the House of Commons order paper with a majority and then passing the legislation. And I think that is the most likely scenario, is that in October we both rule out no deal and vote for a referendum. And the way through I can see Boris doing it, because the thing to understand about this is Boris doesn't believe in anything. I mean, he was in favour of he was against Brexit before he was in favour of it, just as he was against Heathrow before he was in favour of it. I mean, he's the Roman emperor for whom all policy is just bread and circuses. The only thing that matters is he is the emperor. He trade Europe. I mean, that's a minor part to play for being Prime Minister. So if he is forced to hold a referendum by the House of Commons, I think he will hold the referendum rather than take the extreme act of trying to call an election. So what does finally this mean for the Labour Party? Well, actually, I'm a bit more laid back than you might think, because you might expect me to be spitting blood and saying it's terrible what we've been doing, we should have had a hard line main position and all that. And of course, that's my own position, and it's the position of about, in my experience, about 3/4 of Labour Party members and about the same proportion of Labour MPs. But the fact of the matter is, every time it's come to a crunch vote in the House of Commons, the overwhelming majority of Labour MPs and Jeremy and the Shadow Cabinet have voted against Theresa May's deal, and on the last 3 votes in the House of Commons, they voted for a referendum. And it's not because Jeremy wants a referendum, he'd much prefer to have an election, which is the reason why he's trying to keep his options open. The reason he's voted for one each time is that in politics you are faced all the time with straight choices. And faced with the straight choice of rejecting a hard Brexit, which is the only Brexit on offer, and then, because there's not going to be an election, because the government has a majority in the House of Commons, do you or do you not then seek to break the logjam by backing a referendum? On the last 3 votes in the House of Commons where this has come, we have voted in favour of it. Indeed, what I found so astonishing about our policy in the European election is that on the 1st of April, virtually every Labour MP, apart from a few of the diehards, led by Jeremy and the Shadow Cabinet, voted for a referendum with an option to remain. So I was utterly mystified as to why our policy in the European elections was a less Remain policy than we'd already voted for in the House of Commons. And what I think will happen is that when we get the key votes, indeed what I know will happen is when we get the key votes in the House of Commons, we will end up voting for the referendum, because that will be the choice to stop no deal or against the Theresa May deal. And what I think will inevitably happen is that will have to become our official policy too, because there's a limit to how long you can spin out creative ambiguity when you're moving into the end game of this. And the crucial thing was the meeting of the Shadow Cabinet last week, where my account, I wasn't there because I'm not in the Shadow Cabinet, is that everybody who spoke, everyone who spoke apart from Jeremy himself, was in favour now of a straightforward second referendum option to remain on any deal, including John McDonnell, including Emily Thornberry, including Keir Starmer. And even Jeremy himself didn't argue straightforwardly against it. What he said was, we need to consult a bit longer, he said. Now this then comes to what Anne was saying, what can we do? Well, Jeremy has said he's consulting. So give him the benefit of your advice. That is my strong advice. What we need to do is to make clear that we can't carry on having, because what effectively we're in a position, we're in a party, is that we are in fact a Remain party in terms of how we vote in the House of Commons, and what our members want, what MPs say, what the trade unions say, what the Socialist Society say. There's not a single one of them that is against a referendum now. There's a big tension between what we're actually doing and what our official policy still is, which is that we're keeping options open because there might be a better Brexit if Labour came in, and we only hold a referendum if it's not possible to deliver that. In the real world at the moment, there isn't going to be a Labour Brexit in the time frame that we're talking about. Some of us don't actually believe a Labour Brexit will be much better than a Tory Brexit as it happens, but even leave that aside, it simply isn't going to happen. The only Brexits that are going to be on offer are either a no-deal Brexit, which would be catastrophic, or some variant of Theresa May's deal, which is terrible. This is entirely self-inflicted. The people who will suffer most are people in jobs, particularly in jobs that depend upon trade. So it's not the Rees-Moggs and all of that who will be fine, because they all have their big investments and all of that. It's the people who've got real jobs that depend upon real wages, which is, of course, most Labour Party voters. So for reasons of self-interest as well as reasons of principle, we should be supporting a referendum. I think that there will be a majority for it in the House of Commons in October, partly because there's nowhere else to go, but also because by the time you get to October, there'll be a whole group of moderate former ministers, people like Philip Hammond and all of that, who will have by then have left the government, and who certainly are not going to move anywhere near no deal. They've made that very clear, and as that becomes the choice, I think that they will vote with us. And in the key last vote on the 1st of April on a second referendum, the second referendum was only defeated by 12 votes, by 292 votes to 280. So once you add in another group of moderate Conservatives who are not prepared to crash out with no deal or any further negotiation that could lead to no deal, I think you've got a majority. But I want to end on a high point, not a low point. Why is it that I've spent the whole of the last year, I mean, I resigned from the National Infrastructure Commission, I've spent the whole of the last year as a kind of anti-Brexit agitator of a kind I never thought I'd become. I've addressed 160 meetings up and down the country, I've written 2 books, I'm writing a 3rd book. It's sort of taken over my life. Why have I done it? The reason I've done it is because I believe that if we were to leave the European Union and things go badly, and things can go badly, it could be catastrophic for us as a country and for Europe as a continent. We too easily take for granted the fact that we have had 75 years of peace and prosperity. Those are the only 75 years, continuous years, of peace and prosperity that Europe has ever had. The entire previous millennium of the history of Europe has been of either existing or intermittent, either continuous or intermittent conflict between the major states of Europe. And the worst period of conflict of them all was the century before 1945, when we created the EU. And anyone who thinks that this is definitely over and is a thing of the past just has no either historical or cultural sense, or indeed geopolitical feel at all. You just need to look at what's happening west with Trump, east with Putin, who's already invaded one European country and has occupied half of it. And let's be clear, Putin is a fascist straight out of the 1930s. He's occupied half of the Ukraine, he's attacked the other half, he has massive troops on the borders of the three small Baltic democracies. Further east you have President Xi, who is back to Mao. Essentially what passed for the Chinese constitution he's already abolished. We live in a very uncertain, unstable world, and the fact that Europe has been a zone of peace, stability and democracy in the last 75 years has a huge amount to do with the success of parties across Europe like the Labour Party, which have been parties of peace, social democracy and prosperity and partnership working. But even in Europe they're threatened by populist parties, and outside the borders of Europe we have real and present dangers. So it would be, in my view, a potentially catastrophic mistake for us to make. And for those of us who are socialists and social democrats who want to see a fairer, more equal, more peaceful, more prosperous continent, this would be a huge step backwards. And I believe we owe it to the British people, because we are a great democracy, to give them the choice not to make this mistake, which at the best is the completion of Thatcherism, but at the worst could be taking us right back to the 1930s. Thank you very much.